Hello everyone and welcome to the last of the Primperfect talks at SL11B Community Celebration. And this is one of our Meet the Community strand of talks. And I'm delighted to have here Fantasy, who is also known as Eliz Tinsley, who is the organiser of Fantasy Faire for her sins.
Hello, Saffia. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that I was able to join you this evening. I literally just walked in the door from being out all day. So
To find me jumping up and down on her Skype machine saying, "Come here now." Okay, Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about the background to Fantasy Faire? What is it? Why did it start? How did it start? And what is it now?
Well, Fantasy Faire, this was the 6th year that we held it. It was originally started by the Friends Fighting Cancer team, whose captain was Ember Farina. And it was created as a fundraiser for the Relay for Life fundraising season that goes on in SL. And Amber and Xander Green and Lauren Thibault were the 3 people who basically spearheaded the first Fantasy Faire in 2009. And since then, it has grown from 4 Sims to this last year we had 11 Sims for 2 weeks. And not only did we have shopping, which is what we originally had, but we also had role playing, and we had a full performance schedule, DJs, live music, and we also had, for the 3rd year, a hunt, interactive story-driven hunt, 2nd year, written and designed, written by David Abbott and designed by Rin Verwood. So it's grown quite a bit from what it initially was. Every year, bigger and better.
That's definitely true. Every year we say, that's definitely true. Every year we say, okay, this cannot be topped. When I saw Alicia Ember's glass lanterns in 2012, I said, right, okay. I didn't think he could improve on the Temple of New Orn, but he has. He's done this fantastic thing with glass lanterns. This is it. This is the limit. And then how can he improve on this for next year? And of course, he came up with the Scythy Court, the Scythy Court, and the Great Tree, and it was just amazing.
Yes, I think that our designers were very fortunate because we have many of them returning year after year. I know that a lot of them feel that sense of how am I going to top what I did last year? And then somehow they always manage to completely astound everyone who comes to their sim. And I think that in some cases they astound themselves because they just don't believe that they can do it again. And I think that I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about community and how the fair is more than just an event, that there is a community that's grown up around it. And so I was thinking about that today. One of the things that I thought of was that I think that there certainly is a sense of community in the fact that we have the same people coming together every year to put the fair itself together, as far as building it and organizing it, and that in itself is a family that feels like it comes together several months before the fair actually opens its doors to the public that is waiting for it and anticipating it and coming as a community to experience it.
And I think we've got the, I think we also have the example that the community that is going to come in and be the storekeepers and the customers, really, to put it simply, are also part of this community too, because the least thing you throw out to them, they are hugely enthusiastic and they'll talk about it. And I love the way that the kind of the creators and the sim builders mix in with that community and are clearly very much a part of it. It's not a division between them, that everyone's kind of in it together.
Yes, very much so. We have a lot of designers, merchants who have been with us for 5 or 6 years, and that's wonderful. It's a wonderful base for the new people that want to join us every year, because we of course have some turnover with merchants leaving SL or becoming busy, not being able to make it from year to the next, and so there's always a certain amount of turnaround. But when we good example of this is we open up registrations and we say who is designing each sim, and then we give a brief description of what we think the sim is going to look like. And sometimes what we describe is not exactly how it turns out. It's close. What the designer came up with and what the merchants are necessarily reading out of the description might be a little different. But the fact that they know who the designers are and they know what they do year after year, we have people, merchants, when they sign up, they know what designer they want to go with. And so there's a sense of community, I think, on each sim to a certain extent, because you have merchants who are paired up with sim designers year after year. And then you have the general fantasy community that is anticipating the fair coming every year. And I have heard numerous people say that they anticipate this as much as they did Christmas when they were little. This is their big holiday of the year. And they come, and of course, they come to support Relay for Life. That's a huge thing. There are so many people that are involved in the fair because of Relay for Life. They've gotten involved because of Relay for Life and because of their love for fantasy. So they're coming to support Relay for Life. They're also coming to, it's almost like a reunion, to meet people that they don't necessarily see a lot of the rest of the year. But during these 2 weeks, we're all together in one space. And everyone comes to the live music, the DJs, they come, there's constant parties going on, breakout everywhere. We had role playing this year to a greater extent than we've ever had it. And I think that, you'd have these little parties just break out around the role play that was going on, either during role play and was incorporated into the role play, or after the role play, there'd be the spontaneous just group parties.
Okay, so picking up, because we had a short technical hitch, Elizabeth, you wanted to talk about jail and bail and the role that the jail plays in building a community.
Yes, I was just going to say that I think the success of our jail and bails is based a lot on the fact that people come and support other members of the community. They see it as, it really is an event. It's an event within the fantasy community of a personage that is known in the community. It's not, we don't have, good example is Alia Baroque. Has been doing the Gale and Bale, I think, for the last 4 years, and calls very heavily on his group. But it's not just his group that shows up to support him. It is the larger Fantasy Faire group. So, I mean, that's across all kinds of creators. It's people who support the Faire itself. So that's an event in and of itself. Everybody is coming because they know that Alia is doing this. And he's not just being supported by members of the Fallen Gods group. He's being supported by people throughout the entire Faire, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally. And Alia, of course, is also strongly supported by the tiny community because a few years ago he was tricked into a gunshot wedding. What's it called?
Yes,
Is that the right?
a
Shotgun wedding. Yeah, by
Yes,
one of the tiny community.
Yes, he gets himself into some trouble, and so they tend to parade around after him. He has a tiny personality. He's a ferret, and occasionally he will pull that avatar out and do spontaneous, like, jamboree music on calypso drums. I think that was the big thing a couple of years ago. And so Xavian Starsider, who is one of our tinies, he's actually the head of the Fairland Sheriff Association. He created these calypso drums a couple of years ago, and that was the big thing at the fair. Everyone needed a set of calypso drums, and they came in size, petite size, and tiny size. And so you have these groups getting together and doing calypso music, and you could be a petite or a tiny or a regular, normal human-sized guitar. Matter. Everybody could play drums. And so I think that that's a really good example of the way that the community comes together. There aren't cross sections. It's not like this is the tiny space, tinies hang out together, and and here's the petite space, and they don't associate with the tinies, and there's almost like a war between them, which that would be kind of cool too.
Yes, it could be, but it isn't.
Yes. But yes, everybody, there's really this sense of there aren't lines. We don't have groups that are just coming. I'm not explaining this well. I feel like a lot of events, it's very singular. You go and experience it by yourself, or maybe with one or two friends. You go and you shop and you look at stuff and you leave. That's not what the fair is. You come and you might come by yourself, but you don't stay by yourself very long. People just tend to come together, and there's always something going on, whether it's shopping, which of course is fun, but there's so many other things going on that get people involved.
And like the best communities, that's something that's been growing over the years, and it's getting better. Darkover, you're talking about the problem with the clipping. That can happen. It's not necessarily through running Skype. I've had it as a problem sometimes when I'm running Skype and Second Life Voice together. And sometimes I get it just when I'm running Second Life Voice, and I know if I go into Skype it'll be perfect. Elizabeth's clipping a bit in Skype and here as well, I'm afraid. But hopefully, as long as she stays comprehensible, we'll carry on running this rather than going into text. Okay? I'm really sorry, but there's very little we can do about this. Unless, Elizabeth, you want to take another trip to Voice Echo Island. That sometimes helps me. But that's actually, no, that's not going to help you, because if you're having a problem in Skype as well, which you are, then I think it's just not going to help.
I think it's probably my internet connection, and I apologize to everyone. Earphones.
Yeah, it's the problems with the internet. Okay, so let's, going back, this has kind of grown over the years. Is it very difficult to manage, or do you find that basically you just kind of, I mean, the whole event obviously takes quite a lot of managing, setting everything out, organizing everything, but is there a sense in which you're kind of pushing a finger on a stone and it then starts rolling down the hill and you just have to watch as it descends, not quite sure how it's going to end up?
I think that that's very much what it is. There's this big upward push coming in to the fair. Before the fair, I start thinking about it in September. I start talking to designers. I try to have them all lined up by the end of December, so at least I know who's doing some. So the sim designers are starting maybe January to start doing their thing. We have merchants coming on board in February. And so there's a lot of organization going on, pulling all of this stuff together, getting all of the performers together maybe in March, getting them booked. And then, of course, having morphed from just its origins and as being a shopping event, but morphing into more of having a full-blown hunt, which is an event in itself. And then also here bringing on role playing, which was happening. We had 3 different groups, actually 4, because we had a spontaneous group come and join us once the fair started. But they were all doing their own stories. And Saffia, you did a brilliant job coordinating all of that. I'll want to give you due credit there. But there are so many things now going on that are beyond just me organizing the designers and the creators, which was a lot in and of itself. And I have to say this year, we delegated more than we've done in past years, and that was, I think, what really allowed the fair to be so successful this year with these multiple areas of events going on. And I just really want to say that I work with an incredible group of people. David Abbott, Saffia, and Sonia, who did our blog amazingly well this year. I would not have been able to pull things together without them. But having teams to get everything ready, and then we open the doors. And once we open the doors, it just snowballs. I mean, we have things in place like the performers, and that in and of itself, keeping all of that going is a lot of work. But the spontaneity of what happens when the community actually comes together, that's not us at all. We just kind of sit back and say, we've created the stage for you, and we've applied some music, and basically everything else that happens is the community deciding that they want to do stuff.
And they do come up with some fantastic things. I remember the one year when the Tinies started having spontaneous steel band parties all over the place.
Yes, exactly. And the whole story with Alia and the shotgun wedding, that was completely crafted between the Tinies and Alia. So, we're not having anything to do with that at all. And that happens every year. We have these stories that grow in and of themselves that are simply taking place in with there's their background. And we haven't talked to anybody. We haven't said, hey, do this. These are people bringing their own ideas and inspirations to The Sims and saying, wow, what if we did this? And then they do it.
It's something I've noticed with the jail and bails. Most of the jail and bails are really completely acted out. That they're not just events where it happens, but someone like Alia is telling a whole story
Yes.
about it, and Clover is standing there weeping for her husband, and it becomes hilarious and complicated.
Yes, there's very much a story behind so many of the things that go on at the fair. And I think that we have a lot of people that come to the fair not necessarily knowing the background. They're just coming, they saw it on the destination guide. A friend told them, hey, go check this out. There's a creator there that they like. So they come and they're walking around and they walk into the middle of these things. And I think that one of the really amazing things about this core group of people at the fair is they're very welcoming. And so when you have someone who just kind of went by, you stop because the story is so engaging and the people who are involved in what is going on, the jail and bail or the calypso drum musical or whatever, are are so friendly and welcoming in and of themselves that they pull people in. So we have two things going on. We have a community that's very creative in getting these stories up and running on their own, but they're also very welcoming to people who they don't know. And I think that there's a real sense of camaraderie and wanting to just reach out and show people this is what SL is. SL is the ability to create your dreams. And that's what we're doing here. So, hey, come join the party.
I think something else that's true of Fantasy Fair is that there's a kind of consonance between the infrastructure of the event and the people who are at the event in a way that's almost unique with things like the Home and Garden Centre, the Home and Garden Expo. There's a strong community of designers there for whom it's the one chance in the year for them to get together and to show off their best and newest products. There's not a real sense of community with the visitors, although everyone likes to see the visitors and the creators are very friendly, but there's not really a connect between them. I don't know how Fashion for Life works, whether that works the same way, but with Fantasy Fair, it's like the visitors are treated more as part of the community that
I
the
think,
fair is for. And that's different and quite interesting, I think.
well, like I said before, there's there's very much this feeling of the fair being a yearly event that's a reunion type of thing. And so I think that a lot of people who have been to the fair before come to it with the idea that, oh, I'm going to see all of the people that I haven't seen for a year, and I'm going to meet all the people that came in this past year. There's very much a sense of wanting to interact at the fair. And I think that that's what makes it different than a lot of other events, because not only do you have people coming to the fair excited about it, but I think you have a lot of creators who are, they're just as excited. And how explain this? They're, I'm thinking, I think that our creators feel as excited about being at the fair as our visitors do. And they're like all on the same level in a certain way, because our creators are in awe of the Sims and what's been designed and what they're a part of, and the visitors are looking at the Sims. And so you have a creator standing next to a visitor, and they're both standing there with their jaws hanging open saying, wow, look at that. And then they're like, yeah, wow. So they're like bonding over this amazing world that's been created for them. And then, they go out and dance together. And I think that's what's happening. I think that I think that our visitors and our creators are both so just overwhelmed and inspired and loving the world that's been created for them, that there isn't this sense of, I don't know you, that like disappears completely.
Something else that I think is quite significant is the fact that you have things like Fantasy Fair Radio, which is particular to the Fairlands. And this year, we actually tried, as well as the usual Fantasy Fair, which name checks sponsors and which gives out information about DJs as well sometimes. This year there was actually and it has little Fantasy Fair things running on it, comments and things that, I don't know, trailers? Can we call them trailers?
Yes. And we have ads.
Yeah.
We have specially written ads for fantasy products that don't really exist, but should.
And then there's also the news bulletin we had this year, which was quite fun, which sort of updated people on the role play situations, so they knew what to look out for. There's so much that can be done to make it, and that's being done to make it a whole community event, I think. You can guess I'm enthusiastic about Fantasy Fair.
I think, and this is one thing that I haven't spoken about, I think that there's also, I really need to touch on the fact that the Fairlands themselves, the Sims that come together to create the fair, they're called the Fairlands. They're, in our mind, they're a continent, a fantasy continent that is created for the duration of the fair, and then they fade back into the mist and they'll reappear. So the idea is we have an entire story behind the fantasy fair. Not only do people feel that it's a reunion, that's the story that's been kind of set and put up there. We have actually created the story around this idea that they do feel it is a once a year reunion, and we create a world, and these people are all citizens of the Fairlands. And the fair, like I said, the Fairlands has a history, and I don't think we have a history, and we have history books, we have stories and legends, and I don't know of any other shopping event that has stories and legends and background and future where we're headed. And I mean, we're a country and we're
Uh,
populated with people.
and of course, sometimes the necessity for visitors to save the Fairlands, which is rather unusual.
Well, we're always getting ourselves into trouble. We're all that magic's all over the place, and people aren't always careful with what they put next to what else is on the shelf, and you never know what's going to happen.
There's also, I love the way that over the years, Fantasy Fair has drawn on different traditions of fantasy as well. This year there were quite a few slightly dark sims. There was, oh gosh, Morning Vale, and also the Swamp one, which was,
Heaven,
yeah,
Slow.
yes, Heavenslough. And also, but I was thinking of Blackwater Glen.
Yes. Well, I probably had something to do with that this year. I go to the designs in December, January, and what I say is because the Fairlands is content, I never go to them and say, I want you to create something from The Lord of the Rings, or I want you to create something from some like The Wind in the Willows or Harry Potter, or so. I never say
Mm.
that. What I say is, I want you to create a habitable environment. I want you to create. That's how I want you to think, like a jungle. I want you to create a desert. I and I want you to think that the people that are coming to be on the sim, they're the inhabitants. They're the people who live here. So you need to create an environment, a fantasy environment, but it needs to be a place that people live and play and work and do all those things. And so I usually have a list of environments that I would like to see. And this particular year, I have had it in my mind I'd really like a swamp because we haven't had one. And so I told everybody I'd really like a swamp, thinking, as in the past, nobody wants to do a swamp. They're like, nah, I don't want to do a swamp. Well, this year, apparently everybody wanted to do a swamp. So yes, I got 3 swamps.
And you've got a darker edge of fantasy. And usually, as well, you have something which I think is quite important, which is a children's fantasy. As Justin
Yes.
says, you were swamped. Um, you've usually had an element of children's fantasy. I think that's incredibly important and often overlooked when we talk about fantasy, because most of us acquired the taste with children's books and the kind of fairy tales and stories we were told when we were very young, and then read in things like Wind in the Willows and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Where the Wild Things Are and all that sort of thing. And you've usually managed to have one sim each year that has reflected kind of childhood fantasy. And that
Yes.
has been, I think, really good. This year, it was, of course, the latecomer Wigginstead Mooring.
Yes, and we were very fortunate to have Hale come in and do that in basically a week. He designed the sim and built it in a week, and then it ended up being the perfect place for the Rickety Weasels to do their role play, which was brilliant there. And it's very funny that you say that, Saffia, that we always seem to have an element of children's fantasy because it's never been something that has been specifically dictated. It's always just happened. I mean, we've been very fortunate in that, because, and I think that you're right. I think all of us have that experience of having first been introduced to fantasy through the stories that we heard as children, fairy tales, and Lloyd Alexander and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and now Harry Potter, of course. But those, so I think that in the back of our designers' minds, that's there, and miraculously, it always bubbles to the surface for someone. It's kind of a roll of the dice as who's going to have that sim every year, but it always seems to be there.
And it's very effective. You have had some sort of darker sims, but you've never gone in for the really, which are the more popular dark fantasy things. Fantasy Faire keeps it quite light, doesn't it? I mean, I'm thinking of things like werewolves and vampires. You don't really, you haven't really had any
We have
sims for those.
no, we've never really had. We had, I think it was in 2010. We had a Forest of Shadows. Um, and that was where we had some merchants who were more gothic and more vampire oriented, and that's where they tended to be. But I think that they just slowly over the years, we've kind of lost that group. And I would love to have someone do a truly gothic sim, like with rain and the lightning flashing in the background and an ominous dark castle or something like that. But someone has to be inspired to do that. I think it would be really cool sim. But like I said, it really is up to the designers as to what inspires them. I say to them that they need to have fun with whatever they're doing. And this is basically them getting a free sim. And is there anything that they've ever wanted to build that they just didn't have the sims for? And that's how we get the sims that we get. These are the sims that our designers would build if they just had a sim. And so we're very fortunate in that. And to answer the other part of that question, I do think that our designers tend to be very aware that the Fantasy Fair is connected with Relay for Life. And so when we go to dark places, we never go there without a ray of hope. And I think that comes through. Even like last year, we had the sim that Lofty Markstein did that was inspired by the Dark Tower.
Yes.
The field of Crimson Field. And he was concerned that originally the name that he came up with, I think, was Field of Oblivion for that. And we talked about it and we decided that maybe that wasn't the best name because of the way people might take it. So we changed the name to Crimson Fields, and then it's obviously a very stark sim, but there was a depth of beauty in that sim, and I think that just a real purity. And I think that even in our darkest sims, there's always this sense of hope and beauty, that no matter how dark it is, there's always light. And I think that goes along with how all of us feel about what we're really doing this for, which is as a fundraiser for the American Cancer Society. And that's always in the background. It's always there in our thoughts that every linden that we are raising is going to help the fight against cancer.
Right. I actually loved that the Crimson Field sim. For me, that was one of the most richly symbolic sims that has been at Fantasy Fair, because the whole idea of the Dark Tower is very, I mean, it's in the Stephen King cycle, but it's also deeply rooted in mythology. And there's the Browning poem, the Louis MacNeice play, the quote in Shakespeare, always the idea of the Dark Tower. Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came. That goes, and that is, so rich in terms of mythology, and you could draw on that in so many ways, which the sim had the potential to do. I loved it.
Well, and that's the other wonderful thing about Sims is the designers have an idea in mind when they create the Sim, but because they're so open-ended, because they are creating environments more than replicating a story,
Mm.
when the visitors come, when the merchants come, when the visitors come, they really can take a sim and create their own story and be inspired by what the environment is and have their own ideas. Um, just like you did. I know that Lottie's inspiration was the Dark Tower because the Stephen King novels, because that's what he told me. That's how he told me to describe it. But when you saw that sim, it meant many different things for
Mm.
you. And I think that that's a wonderful thing that our designers are able to do for people who visit the fair. They create pages from stories, and then people walk into them.
I think that's a great note to perhaps start to move to a conclusion here. I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions for Elizabeth. Now is your time to ask.
And I don't mind if people don't ask questions. I feel like I have kind of been rambling here.
Okay, we've got two from Justin. He's saying that depth also helps to make an easier connection with so many people. Imagination. Okay, no, actually, his question is, what stories inspired you as a child?
I hate questions like that because when people ask me to remember, I'm like, I don't remember. I was a big fairy tale reader. I've always loved fairy tales, and of course, I started with like the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales, but I just went into all kinds of collections, just about anything that I can read that's based on a fairy tale. So that has had a huge effect on me. Probably my very favorite story ever was The Neverending Story. And I have to say that I read the book before the movies came out. And so when the movies came out, I know that people love the movie. I do not, because the book is so much better. And of course, I had my experience with the book first. Um, but I would say that the never-ending story, just the entire idea of the never-ending story, and that this was a place where all of the creatures, the fantasy creatures, came together and lived together. It's kind of like the Fair. And it was a continent that had its dark part and its fairies and its everything. And yeah, I would say that that's a huge inspiration for me.
And then we have a question from Les, which is, do you plan to do any more Second Life stroke real life projects like we did this year?
I would love to do more things like that. This year, Les was able to help us with doing a crossover where he produced jewelry in SL, and then people could also buy that same jewelry printed from a 3D printer. And I know that we had several people that ordered Fantasy Fair pendants, and that was an amazing thing that we had never been able to offer before. Another thing that we want to do, and Saffia is actually working on this now, is like to create a real life calendar of photos from The Sims that we would be able to sell to anybody who wanted one, for to be able to keep track of the dates in 2015. Highlighted, of course, when the fair is going to be next April. So,
absolutely, yeah. We ought to try and work out when the fair is going to be and then print that into the calendar.
Yeah,
so no one has any excuse for missing it.
That was an important holiday.
We had another question. Let me just see. From Laban here, Laban Core. Do you draw a line between fantasy and historical medieval content at Fantasy Fair?
We don't. I mean, I certainly have never drawn a line. I know that we have several creators who come who are basically creating for role play communities, and I know some role play communities are fictional. Some of them are more historical. So we really welcome everyone. I know that, I'm trying to think, a really good example, we have a store that creates historical weapons like cannons and firearms and swords. And for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the store now, which is horrible, but they are historically accurate. Yet he comes to the fair because I feel that he thinks that it's a very good opportunity for him to be able to put his wares in front of role players. And so I think our role players, we have role players coming from in a historic background, but also from a fantasy background. And fantasy people can take historically accurate things and create a story around them, same as someone who's looking for a historical piece can take it and use it in an appropriate way. I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. If someone has asked a question and I've missed it, could you type it again now, please? Okay, I think that's it. And I'd like to say thank you to Elizabeth for coming here. A mad rush as it was. I'd like to say thank you to all of you for coming. This has been brilliant. It's been a brilliant week, a brilliant season of talks. Lots of interesting discussions have been going on here, not the least of which, oh, and I suppose I ought to ask you, Elizabeth, because it's something we've talked about a lot. Do you think that you will have Fantasy Fair on Second Life's new platform?
I have no idea why would.
Okay.
There's a platform that people are going to. There's absolutely no reason to go there too.
Right. Okay, so, okay, I was just asking, sorry, I forgot to turn my mic on for that one. I was actually asking if Elizabeth could see Fantasy Fair going to the new Second Life platform.
I guess what I see about that is yes, I do see us being able to the new one. And the reason that is, I guess what I'm thinking is that whatever
I,
lab,
I think you've broken up completely now, Elizabeth. I'm sorry.
all right, that's okay.
Okay, so we will call it a night there, I think. And this is the very last talk in this auditorium, the very last event in the auditorium. So this is the end of the week as far as this goes. Is that a shame? Okay, but I'm sure we'll all be back next year. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, I'll be at Relay for Life, and then I'll be at the Home and Garden Expo.